Any superintendent knows that turf maintenance is so much more than mowing. Keeping your grass healthy and your surfaces playable often requires an array of agronomic equipment and practices. Mowing, aeration, dethatching, spraying, and of course, rolling all play their part. Luckily, turf professionals and institutions are hard at work experimenting with solutions and studying the effects of different practices. Recently, the Turf Pathology Lab in the Stockbridge School of Agriculture at UMASS Amherst completed a 3-year study that may help turf professionals evaluate their own practices for dollar spot control. For 3 years, James Popko and his team at UMass Amherst observed the effects of rolling with different frequencies on the presence of dollar spot infection sites on sections of turf. The study found that rolling may be an effective tool to help control and prevent dollar spot mold infections. MTE visited the Joseph Troll Turf Research Center with James Popko, and we got his thoughts on the subject.
So the first question we had is, how applicable is fairway rolling to real practical turf solutions? So the main question that we had was, how often do you need to do this? And so we started to look at was rolling 3, 4, or 6 times per week and comparing those different rolling frequencies. Ultimately, what we found from that is the more often you can roll, the larger reduction in dollar spot you will see. And all the studies we've done have taken kind of the disease control angle. And we're trying to help practitioners use less inputs, so less fungicides. In fairway rolling, it's a cultural practice that is effective. So a lot of it is trying to find out how do we design stuff for practitioners to use.
What is dollar spot?
So dollar spot is the biggest problem that we deal with in the Northeast. It's not a problem that necessarily is going to completely kill grass swards, but we're looking at making somewhere around 10 applications to control this disease in the Northeast, depending on where you are. The farther south you go, the more applications you make. We've done a lot of work in our lab looking at fungicide resistance, and it's a growing problem in dollar spot. So one of our ideas with using fairway rolling is this a cultural practice where we can take the edge off this disease, where we can either reduce fungicide applications or reduce the amount of disease pressure that practitioners face. Dollar spot's a foliar disease. It's favored by humid weather. Generally, when we have ample soil moisture and high humidity, warmer nights, those conditions are going to really drive that particular disease.
What results did you see?
So the first year in the study, we got great results. Some of the best, to kind of be a nerd here, but statistically, they look great. We didn't have a lot of variability rep to rep. It was really awesome. I was very excited. So we just go out, we do the same thing the next year, kind of start the same time of year and all that. The first week we start, we get hit with a pretty decent dollar spot epidemic. And that happened about 5 weeks before we saw disease in the first year of the study. So I think it's really important to basically roll preventatively. And I would say from what we've seen so far, about a month of rolling before you would first see dollar spot, that's about when you want to start. We've got a separate study that we've initiated to specifically look at that question. We're in the second year of that, so hopefully after a couple of years we'll have maybe a more accurate recommendation for that. But in total, we've done 15 studies roughly on dollar spot and trying to control it. And we've seen significant reductions in the amount of disease in 12 out of the 15. The ones where we were unsuccessful, we tended to start rolling right before an epidemic, or we didn't have that period of dollar spot free rolling. So I think that's the most important part for that.
Why do you think these results occurred?
So I think in terms of with rolling preventing dollar spot, there's the additional leaf wetness removal. I think that's a factor. I think we're stimulating plant defense responses by putting this mild stress on it. The other thing that we've seen and that we're investigating is looking at thatch. We know with the pathogen that causes dollar spot, it primarily lives in the thatch, so that area right below your actively growing grass. when we look at cores that have been rolled for an entire season, we see that thatch layer is compressed. We've done some studies to see, are we actually reducing it? And from a numbers standpoint, we're not reducing the organic matter, but we're compressing it. So I think we're changing that composition, and that's also creating, an effect on the pathogen as well. So it's the kind of a combination of those three main factors I think are really important. And if we can get some of those modifications before environmental conditions become very favorable for the pathogen, I think that's helping in the control aspect.
How should practitioners incorporate rolling per the results of this study?
So I think it's a part of the puzzle. It's not a silver bullet, but from what we've seen, you can get between really like a 30 to a 50% just reduction in disease. So if your fungicides have 30 to 50% less disease to control, I think that's a huge win in my book. In terms of cultural practices, it's effective. There's a lot of times where you mimic and you're trying to look at a bunch of things and you can't get it to really work year to year. I feel pretty good about what we've seen with rolling, mostly just because of the sheer amount of experiments we've done and also previous work that's been done on putting greens. And we've also started to look at other things like fertility, like different nitrogen sources, plant growth regulators, or even say biocontrols. Like, could you use rolling with biocontrols to effectively control dollar spot? So these would be, methods that are, maybe more sustainable, or if pesticide restrictions come down, in 10, 15 years, if this stuff ever, happens, we'll have some alternatives to look at and see, well, this is how effective we can be without a standard fungicide program. Is this acceptable, for a certain turf manager situation? So for turf health, dollar spot, what's the best way or most effective way to roll? I think it needs to be done preventatively. So typically about a month before you start to see dollar spot on your property. The more rolling, the better. One of the ways that we tried to increase rolling frequency was to do a double roll. Due to fairway mowing, there's going to be 2 to 3 times per week. You already have a major event going on fairways. So if you're able to roll a fairway twice when you're on it, you're increasing your weekly frequency. And we saw that going, something we did is we rolled 6 times per week, but it was really only 3 days, and it was a double roll. And then when you compare that to rolling 3 times per week as a single roll, you have more dollar spot control with the 6 times double roll. So again, one way I'd look at it, if I'm managing a whole property, I've got maybe 5 fairways that really I have trouble with. Maybe I double roll those, single roll the rest of the property. So I think each place has to figure out how it fits in with their style, timing, play, all that. But it's a very customizable approach where you go out, you play with it, and you kind of see what works. But obviously, the more you can do it, the greater disease reduction you're going to see.
What are some variables to consider?
Dollar spot's been recently reclassified to having multiple genuses and multiple subspecies. You have lots of different types of creeping bentgrass, annual bluegrasses that are out there on fairways, and they have vastly differing, disease susceptibility. So that plays a huge role. I think thatch plays a very big role, where if you have a lot of thatch on fairways, you're probably going to have more dollar spot. So I think rolling is one way that, we're still trying to look at and quantify, does this reduce thatch? And if it does, that's another cultural practice that works. So I think that's really good.
What other practices should be kept in mind?
If you're able to verticut, dethatch, and even top dress as well, all those things are going to remove organic matter, dilute it. I think just the rolling with any top dressing is also going to probably speed up and decrease organic matter as well. We haven't looked at that, so I don't have actual data to support it, but it's from what a lot of top dressing work suggests, it probably would work as well.
What are some other benefits of rolling?
So I think, another aspect or another way to incorporate fairway rolling is it increases playability. It increases ball roll. The surfaces are firmer. From superintendents I've talked to who use it, it's almost like buying everyone at the course a new driver. Because if you get an extra 5-10 yards off the tee, everyone notices that. It makes golf more fun. You know, it's one of the things we're trying to do is you know, make people want to come out and play. And I think that helps. And I think, you know, high-end facilities who are striving to really get to that next level, it's a way to really help, you know, increase firmness and do, you know, a lot of those tasks.
What about rolling for weed control?
So we noticed significantly less dandelion pressure on one of our areas where we've been rolling for 3 years. And I think a lot of that has to do with when dandelions would be germinating, you're kind of disrupting that taproot that would be formed by rolling, and I think that's providing some of the control. When we look at the areas, especially in our rolling frequency areas, the untreated, unrolled areas always have more dandelion pressure than the other areas. I'll say it with the caveat that once we started to notice this, we said we're not going to treat for weeds at all because we really wanted to amplify this effect and see exactly what rolling is and isolate it. That's the beauty of research. You get to isolate things, you know, something you might not necessarily do on a golf course. We can see how it happened. You know, there's some situations where, you know, I definitely think, you know, I think that would work. Organic golf course. We've talked to the Vineyard Club. They're one of the few organic golf courses. You talk to the superintendent. He says, if I could have anything, it would be, you know, herbicides to control weeds. Well, maybe rolling would be an actual, you know, way to do that, you know, without using herbicides.
What's next from UMass Amherst?
Yeah, so we got the rolling start time one. That's definitely the biggest one. We've got 3 studies that'll wrap up at the end of the year where we've looked at different nitrogen sources, kind of spoon feeding in combination with fairway rolling to see if there's a most effective way to do that. Plant growth regulators plus spoon feeding with nitrogen, the biocontrol study, the rolling start time. And then the other thing we're trying to do is interact with golf courses who buy a roller, take thatch samples when they first start rolling, and then start taking these yearly to try to monitor, you know, real world reductions in thatch where people have fairway rolling programs.
Any final thoughts?
Smithco's been, they provided support for us, you know, throughout the whole time, so we appreciate that. You know, it's great to be able to use the same equipment that somebody's going to use on a golf course for that specific process. And it's, you know, it takes up a lot of room, but we're happy we're able to try to replicate it as close as possible in a real world situation. I'd like to thank the New England Turfgrass Foundation. They've funded from some of these studies, as well as the New York State Turfgrass Association. So they've been very good in terms of funding some of this rolling work that allows us to get out and, you know, do 5-6 studies a year. So it's great. So thank you.
This study was performed using a Smithco fairway roller provided by Smithco. MTE reached out to Emil Miller from Smithco for comment. The results speak for themselves and prove the utility of rolling as a sound agronomic practice. We want to thank James Popko, the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and Smithco for their help with this media production. Thank you for watching, and be sure to stay tuned for more videos from MTE Turf Equipment Solutions.